Ooh. There it goes. Heard myself talking.
I know there's so many little settings to get straightened away.
Yes.
Okay, let me turn off my volume, and we are live. So welcome everybody to our Tuesday afternoon live stream. This week, I am your host, Dana Morningstar, and with me is the lovely and talented Angie Atkinson. So welcome, Angie.
Thank you. Always happy to be here.
Good deal. Always happy to have you. And for those of you that are just hopping on, if you're new, this is a live stream that we do every Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We alternate channels. So this week we are obviously over here, but next week we'll be over on Angie's channel. So make sure that you subscribe to both of us so you can keep up with the alerts. Let's see, we've got Kamami's here from France. Kamami's normally here on the Wednesday night live streams, and I know it's the middle of the night.
Oh, right on.
We got Crystal, Anna, Julia, James, hello.
Hey, everybody.
And so Angie and I were talking about just the kind of a topic to open with. And I wanted to mention, this was a comment that I got from the live stream last week where we had been discussing healing. And I had mentioned one of the things I frequently see, and one of the things that I experienced with all of this is a lot of people really get hung up with thinking that healing, healing means going back to the way that they were. And it's one of these little mindset shifts that can shave years off of your healing. So it's so critically important that we understand that healing isn't about going back to the way we were. Life is always about growth. It's never about going backwards. And so it really helps to get to redefine who we want to be in this next chapter of our lives, and to make that definition the most empowering definition possible. So Angie, I guess, have you experienced this, or when you were healing, did you go through anything like this?
Yeah, I think I thought I was going to become, I want to get back to being who I'm supposed to be, or who I am, or who I used to be. And I'm unfortunately, even if it's just been a few months, you're never going to be exactly the same. But most of us spend more than a few months. I mean, a lot of us spend more than a few months with these people. So you have to think, not only have you aged, not only have you maybe had children or moved house or whatever, something has changed. You're never going to be the same person, but I think you can become like a better version of yourself, or an ideal version of yourself in this moment. I don't know, but I have definitely experienced that feeling. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And one of the things that I really like about your work and you're just you as a person is that attitude of that positive attitude of like, okay, yes, this is where we are and this is what happened, and let's create this compelling vision for the future.
Yeah.
Because it is so important.
It really is. It's something I tell my daughter. She thinks she's going through a thing, she's 11, and she thinks that, Mom, everybody can't be positive all the time like you. And I try to explain to her, I say, if I had known at your age what I know today, I would have been incredibly powerful, because what I didn't know then and what I do know now, and what I didn't know even in my 20s and 30s was, I guess I learned it in my 30s, was that you really do make a choice. And it's not to say that other outside forces won't affect you and things like that. But ultimately, if you decide, I'm going to heal, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to stay positive, your life will change in tremendous ways. It's the intention of being happy that starts, I think, the roller coaster. No, the domino flip thing. What is it when they?
I think it sets the intention.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Our brain is such a cool thing. I mean, it just works over time. Like once you have that intention set, whatever it might be, our brains start working to our brains love a problem. It's like a dog loves a bone. Our brains love a problem. And if we set that intention of, okay, I want to create a really empowered understanding of myself and an empowered version of my future, even if you don't know what that is, just setting that intention, your brain will get to work, and you're going to start seeing different things along the way that you might not have even seen before.
Yeah.
So it's wild. You might start noticing art classes you've never noticed before, or different people that have come into your life that you're like, ooh, I really like their energy, or I like their certain interests or whatnot. So
I think it has to do with the way that however you're perceived, like you said, however you perceive the world. Like if you walk through the world and you think everything's terrible, then you're going to pull out all the terrible things and see those, right? But yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. Good stuff.
yeah, well, let's see what's going on in the chat over here. Carly says, I need your advice, please. Well, go for it, Carly. Do you have a question for us?
Let us know.
Let us know.
Let's see. Oh, this is great. Agata says, our brain lives questions. I think she meant loves. She said it's best to start inquiries. Translate your intentions into bunches of questions and inquiries, and you start an adventure of your life. I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think that's absolutely the truth. I think any progress I've ever made in my life must have started with a question and an intention. That's really cool. Thank you. I like that.
Absolutely. Like, I think that's so right on, because really, like, if we truly want to change our life, we need to start asking different questions.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
So instead of, this was another topic that comes up a lot, and I'm sure you've had this too, where, people, and I get it, because I think, you probably do too, because we were there, but it's sort of like we get caught up in asking why me, or more of like that focus on the abuser. And if we can shift, and there's a time and place for that, but if we can shift those questions down the road, once enough time has passed and our wounds aren't so raw, that we're able to say, okay, well, what can I do to make this situation work for my highest and greatest good? What lessons can I squeeze out of this? What can I do with this? What positive thing can I do with this? If you had a mother who was absolutely awful, an answer to that might be, you know what, I can really do everything that she didn't do.
Right.
For my kids. And I can make myself an even better mother because of this. It's just really making that declaration to yourself that not only are you not going to let this ruin your life, but you're going to take it and use it for your highest and greatest good.
Yeah, I love that. And that's really the truth. I mean, I could think of a million examples just like that. And I'm with you. I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think if we can it's hard to do it, right? It's hard to stop and go, okay, I've just been through a trauma, or I've just been through a negative situation of any sort. And, I just want to lick my wounds. I want to crawl in bed and forget about the whole thing. But you're right. If we can take a lesson from it, I mean, for example, a lame example, let's say that, for example, I left my car unlocked once in my driveway, and I live in a pretty decent neighborhood. You wouldn't think anything would happen, but sure enough, somebody broke into the car, opened the car door, and it was kids. I'm sure we heard about it in the next door thing. Anyway, but what was interesting about that is that normally I lock my door and I don't have that problem. So what did I learn? Lock my door. It's a silly thing. It's a small thing, but little things, you know what I mean? So I guess, Angela Falsetta, excuse me 1 second. She said, she was my very first sponsor on my channel. So I just want to say hello to her.
Okay.
She says, hi, sound excited. I've been MIA on the channel. I'm sorry, I'm moving around. Please forgive me. Of course, my goodness. She said she's back and she misses us. All right, cool. Welcome back. And she gave you a $5 zipper.
Yes. Yeah, very cool.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to. I just didn't want to miss her.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Let's see. You were right in the middle of saying something that was.
Oh yeah. So I guess my point is the same as yours, is that you can, that thing that I talked about with the car in the driveway is obviously a little tiny thing, right? But, and nothing was even stolen. They just pulled everything out of the glove box and dumped everything out. It was whatever, no big deal. It was kids looking for probably money or whatever. But I learned never to leave my door unlocked. It was a tiny lesson I could pick up that would save me a lot of trouble later, maybe. And the same thing for any trauma, that was not a trauma, let me just clarify. But for anything that happens. Another thing, when my oldest son was a baby, I was still married to my narcissist. His first Christmas, somebody we went out of town and somebody broke into our home and trashed the house, took everything, and it took me a while to get over that one. But I learned new ways to fall asleep and new ways to, calm myself down because I had to really, but I took the lesson out of it. I learned to talk to neighbors before I leave and, leave town or whatever, or have someone stay at my house or whatever. Again, those are both weird examples, but anything that we do, anything we experience, if we choose to, like you said, we can create positive change from it. And I think when we change our perspective overall and we look at things like we have more control than we think, when we look at it from that perspective, I think it's a huge, personal growth thing. I think it changes lives in big, huge ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really difficult, it can take a person a little while to get to that place because there is so much pain and there is so much anger, and it's righteous anger and it's understandable pain. And all of that is completely appropriate and normal. But like I was saying, down the road, once we're more in the rebuilding stage, yes, to understand, okay, there can be life after this, and the life we create after this can be even better than before, because now we're consciously going about choosing the pieces with which to rebuild. And there's a comment in the chat kind of along the same lines. It's from Broken Winged Angel, who says, do you honestly believe perception is the definition of reality? Change your perception and your reality will change. I keep hearing that in different places.
Can I say,
sure.
I actually was looking at that comment or that question. I believe this. I believe that for me in my life, when I recognized the power that I have over my perception, when I recognize the power that I have, I cannot control everything for sure. But what I recognize is that when I can put it in my own box, for example. So let's say that whatever happens, I can decide, am I going to see this as a good thing or a bad thing? Am I going to see this as something I can learn from? Am I going to see this as something that's going to knock me down and take me out? You know what I mean? So in that way, perception is, we choose how to see things. We choose how to take things into ourselves or not. And so for that reason, I say yes. But I want to be really clear and specific and say this. Certainly, we didn't choose to be with a narcissist. Certainly, we didn't choose to be parented by a narcissist. I mean, not that we're aware of anyway. Whatever it is that we've gone through, we didn't necessarily know that that's what we were. So I'm not saying that it's our fault that we experience those bad things. And I'm not saying we have control over other people, because we don't. But we do have control over how we perceive it. So when I got to the point where I was like, wait a minute, I'm okay, and this person isn't treating me like I'm okay, or I'm a decent person, this person's acting like I'm the devil, then I had to recognize, okay, do I choose to be the devil, or do I choose to recognize that I'm okay and this person's wrong? That's one example. But when we become secure enough in ourselves and we learn how to trust our own intuition, which is taken from us by most narcissists in our lives, they take away the ability to trust ourselves and the ability to, even to define ourselves. Mm-hmm. At least that was done to me. And so when we take that back and we go, no, I'm not the devil. No, I'm not this or that or whatever. And in fact, I became indignant at some point, and I was like, are you freaking kidding me with this? I think that's powerful. But again, the perception kept me stuck. The perception that I didn't know who I was, that I had no identity, that I wasn't important, that I didn't have a voice, those things kept me stuck. And then when I woke up and I thought, wait a minute, I do have a voice. Wait a minute, I do matter. That was my change in perception, and that changed my life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. And I just wanted to touch on that a little bit too, because like you were saying, well, there's so many things that you said, Angie, that I thought were just wonderful. The perception of events, it is so important, because I think we oftentimes will hear this. It's part of that well-intended bad advice that's out there of, it's not, it's kind of this unintentional gaslighting of, it's just your perception of things. Like, this person isn't really abusive. They're not really manipulative. This, that, and the other. Just change your perception and change your reality. And I agree with what you were saying, Angie, in that like this event, these things happen. It's important that we be grounded enough within ourselves to understand what is nourishing for us and what is toxic for us, and to not take in what's toxic for us. So for example, and I see this a lot in like different spiritual communities where people are really confused as to why they keep attracting abusive people, or what can they possibly do to change their perception of things because they're trying to make their relationship work. And then they just start spinning in circles and tying themselves up in knots emotionally, trying to make something that's not workable. And so it's important because we had discussed this before on my channel about the difference between like an absolute truth, like a truth with a capital T, and perception of reality, which is truth with a lowercase t. Yeah. And this is because perceptions of reality are different. You can have 10 different people witness a crime, for example, and they'll each have 10 different versions of what happened. Yep. Just because perception is an individual thing doesn't mean that it's invalid. It's all we have. Right. So where I see survivors go wrong with this is then they feel the need, I need to wait around for concrete proof. I need to wait around for that truth with a capital T, because my perception of events is not accurate. This is especially the case if a person's been abused. And like you'd said, their reality, their perception of reality has been completely eroded, and their faith in themselves and their perception of reality has also been eroded. And so then they're continually confused, and this causes them to continually look outside of themselves, to just be like, well, is this a problem? I don't know. Is this a problem? This is what I experienced. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And that's a problem because other people, more often than not, are lacking context. And at the end of the day, we're the ones that have to live with the results. So we need to be able to discern what's a problem for us and what's not a problem for us. Yeah. So we can take the appropriate action.
I agree. And I also just want to toss in here that I think for me, one of the, I called it soul crushing. One of the biggest things that I felt was soul crushing to me in narcissistic abuse was the consistent lack of validation of self, of thoughts, of anything I did, said, was anything. It was invalidated consistently. Yeah. And so I literally had to learn to self-validate. And that's a very difficult process for someone who's never done that. Yeah. But it is worth it. It's worth it. So I think that's I just think that's an important thing to tack on, because it's really easy for you and I to sit here after we've worked through our healing for so many years and done all of our thing to go, you have to self-validate. But we aren't saying all the time, and we do. I think we're pretty honest, both of us. But, it's not easy. It is a process. And this is, I think, part of why we do what we do, because we do offer people a bit of validation, because they go, wait a minute, how is it that they know exactly what this person said? Or how is it that they know the whole cycle? Because that's how we validate our viewers, our communities. But, I think the validation is just a huge, important part that we sometimes underplay. Not we, but society, whatever. Anyway.
Well, and I think probably even us, I think you're absolutely right. That is such a key part, because that not being validated, and this happens in so many different ways. It's constant criticism. It's subtle undermining. It's kind of planting these seeds of insecurity and uncertainty. And the cause of that is a person's terrified to make a wrong choice on anything. They struggle with having an opinion. They struggle with being decisive. They struggle with even knowing what they want, because they're so afraid to be wrong, and they're not even aware that they're afraid to be wrong. Right. And so it really does start with reclaiming your power in little ways, and really thinking, because some of this stuff can really fly under the radar for a very long time, and it can seem so benign. Like, oh, I don't really care where we go for lunch, or I don't really care about this, or I don't know, whatever you want to do. Paying attention to when we're saying that, because especially in the early stages of this, it's really important that we do get in tune with what we want, because we need to get back in tune with our wants and our needs. And so again, it might even feel like, well, who cares if we're having pizza or Chinese, right? But to really become comfortable with saying, you know what, actually, I vote for Chinese. Yeah. And just asserting yourself and making a decision and having an opinion is a big deal. And those are the little steps along the way to becoming more in tune with yourself. And and then it just grows from there.
It does. Yeah. But it does begin, does it not? It begins with that shift in perception. And I think that's, even a little tiny one, like you can change your perception intentionally by deciding to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just really important to remember, is that even a little tiny shift, like, if you hear yourself saying to yourself, it's your self-talk. If you hear yourself saying to yourself, I'm not worth it anyway, or I don't really care, Chinese, like Dana said,
Mm-hmm.
Then change it, pick it, choose your perception. Yeah, good stuff.
Let me just give another quick example about this, in case anybody's confused about perceiving abuse. So Angie, this is something that you had mentioned a little bit before, but so let's say, for example, somebody says something that's really mean, really hateful. Okay. We see this is verbal abuse. This is an insult. So now we can change our perception of it. So how do we do that? So we either acknowledge it and we let that in and we say, yes, these hateful things this person said, they are pretty accurate, and I'm going to accept that and I'm going to take that on because they're right, because they're only right because they said it. And which is not accurate. Actually, I heard a great quote the other day that sums this exact same thing up. It said, don't take criticism from a person you wouldn't take advice from.
Oh, powerful. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that is so accurate. So pay attention to whose criticism you're letting in. So then the shift in perspective, right, can be if somebody says something mean and hateful, to be like, wow, that person must be really unhappy with themselves. That person must be having a bad day. That person has the emotional maturity of a 2-year-old. I'm not owning any of that.
Yeah.
And
Yep. I'm with you. I always try to see it as their limitations, those people who act that way. Now, not to say that constructive criticism isn't a good and healthy thing, because I listen to that like hard, you know what I'm saying? But when it comes to something that's just, a mean, hateful, non-productive thing to say, I'm with you. Those people are limited. I don't need that. Yeah, I'm with you. 100%.
And I think even the whole taking constructive criticism, to not take constructive criticism from a person you wouldn't take advice from. Yeah. Because agreed. I think you and I there's no shortage of advice, like with YouTube and writing books and all of that other people, because of their limitation, right? They're like, oh, well, who are you to be doing that? You can't possibly do that. You can't, and they'll throw out all of these reasons that they don't think that's possible. And in order to do things that most people don't do, you just have to do things most people don't do.
Yeah. Right. And, absolutely. And this is interesting because there are channels on YouTube, and I will not speak about any specific one, but that actually are teaching women, and maybe men too. I don't really watch those, but I've come across this one particular one that I'm not going to talk about the name of. But this beautiful young man sits on camera and talks really sexy, and he tells these women how to get a man to like them. And I don't know how I came across his videos, but I looked at them, and the one that I watched, he was literally teaching them how to be a narcissistic supply. And I just thought, oh my goodness, because it was so, like you said, there's a lot of bad advice out there. So just be really careful. That's all.
Yeah. And, normal people that have never experienced this, I don't even think that they realize that they need to kind of bookend everything they say in giving it context of this does not apply if if you're being abused. Right. All of this relationship advice is only within the context of two healthy people in a healthy relationship.
Right. But have you noticed some of those, I'm sorry to go off topic, but some of those that the rules or whatever, that one book, they start you out with playing games, and then they ask you to not be yourself. They ask you to pretend to like things the other person basically they put you in this spot that you are showing the wrong person. You're not showing yourself at the beginning of the relationship. And then people wonder, why did these relationships fail? Because, but that's a different topic. So I just think it's really, really important to be yourself, to have your boundaries as you're going forward after this type of situation.
Absolutely. That's the gift in all of this.
Yes.
Really.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we've got a question from Michelle here. who says, does the narcissist know what they're doing, or do they think that they are normal? By the way, my narcissist is an alcoholic, a hoarder, an overeater, and extremely overweight.
Well, we can't look inside everyone's head. I think it's an individual. Certainly your narcissist must be aware that they're overweight, I would think. And maybe they know they overeat. It depends on their intelligence, I think, their level of intelligence and self-awareness. Most narcissists aren't very self-aware, and they make excuses in their heads for their behavior. So, I need to eat this much because I'm hungry, and I need to keep all this stuff because I might need it someday. And how dare you question me? And, do they know what they're doing as far as abusing you? I think they must know that they're not nice people, but I can't say that they are cognizant of it. They really reason with themselves. They really convince themselves that they are right and you are wrong, I think. What do you think, Dana?
I agree. Absolutely. I actually saw a quote the other day in the support group. It was from Lundy Bancroft's book on abusive men. And it was a quote about how he had heard these certain abusive men basically really laying out how they would wait until they had this person kind of under control, and then they would begin abusing them. I will say it has been my experience that level of self-awareness and that level of like cruel, cold, calculating behavior is not the norm. The vast majority of the time, I mean, unless they're incredibly predatory, I just think that his experience with that one thing, with that one group of men, I just think that's out of the norm. I think it really, most of the time, like you said, they've been able to do the mental gymnastics necessary in order to justify their behavior. And they do know right from wrong because they're 9 out of 10 times able to hold it together enough in public and around other people. If you are with an abuser who can't even do that, and they're becoming explosive in public, they have no awareness, they're completely justifying their behavior, that level of aggression coupled with narcissism and that level of entitlement and lack of empathy and lack of remorse, that's a very volatile, dangerous combination.
Yep. Like life-threatening.
Yes.
In my opinion.
Absolutely. I agree. Absolutely. Because they just don't care.
Yep. Totally. So Alucard says, after some research, I believe my ex that discarded and recalled, I think she means to say, me recently is a covert narcissist. The question is, can't read today. Question I have is, do all narcissist women do physical abuse or harsh put downs, etc., as mine did not? Oh, that's a great question. You got thoughts on that?
Not all narcissists are physically abusive.
Yeah.
I would probably even wager to guess that the vast majority of them are not. Yeah. It's verbal abuse, it's emotional abuse, it's psychological abuse. And it really, that kind of stuff just tends to stem because they have a very pathological view of reality with themselves at the center of it. And if a person has that worldview of everything revolves around me and I'm always right, then they're going to have to spin every incoming information that doesn't line up with that in order to fit their internal narrative. Yep. So that's why you see a lot of that verbal, emotional, and psychological abuse. But this stuff can escalate to physical abuse if they are aggressive enough and if they feel entitled enough.
Right. And the harsh put downs, that's it's a similar thing, but harsh might not ever be heard out of that. That person might seem sweet all the time. But then these little, like Dana said, these underlying, sneaky, pervasive insults
And that stuff really is the most corrosive. You've probably heard this too, Angie, from people that are like, man, I almost wish this person would just hit me. Because
I've heard that so many times.
Yeah, yes. Because then I would know it was a problem. Because it's that subtle stuff. It's this little digs of, you're so cute. It's so cute that you think that. Or, you're such a blonde. Or, you're such a woman.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Or, are you sure you're not gay? Or do you, like just little things, or, oh, you're such a dumb jock, or it's so cute that you think you know what you're talking about. Or, well, honey, you really need to start watching your weight because no man's going to want you, or no girl's going to want. There's so many like little subtle ways that just erode a person's confidence in themselves. And that's the stuff that's really hard to pinpoint, because it can seem as normal, and it can seem, especially if you've experienced it your whole life, and it flies under the radar of the vast majority of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how they end up being able to publicly, kind of it sort of sneakily abuse you in public. So you might be in a room full of people and they might say like a little phrase to you that sounds like nothing but sweetness and light to everyone around you, but really it's bad. And it's something that triggers you because you have been abused about that thing, or you have been, like for example, if they say to you over and over again, you know what, you would just be so pretty if you lose 20 pounds, then they might say, oh, isn't my wife pretty, or isn't, what my daughter, whatever, and kind of look at you and, wink at you. And it's and that really can become, and people are like, well, isn't that, a little bit overboard? No, it's not, because it's sneaky and pervasive. And so, and you end up, then you crumble and everybody's like, what's wrong with that person? Why, and then the narcissist gets to go, oh, crazy,
Yep.
On it. And then it's a whole smear campaign. Yeah. It's a whole thing.
And like you were saying, it's sometimes it's those comparisons, right? Oh, well, and it might even start off like early on and you're not even aware of it, and there's always like a kernel of truth, not always, but the vast majority of the time there's a kernel of truth to it. So it can seem like we just can't handle, we're just too sensitive.
Yeah. Right.
So if they were to be like, oh, well, you really need to lose, 20 pounds, or, you know what, I don't understand why you just don't get into shape, or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I do need to do that. But the problem with that is it's that negative, unwanted opinion and advice. That's when that kind of stuff becomes abusive. It's defining, it's demeaning, it's diminishing, it's not asked for. And then if you do say, hey, you know what, I don't really want to discuss this with you, and they continue on, then it's a problem, because they're eroding, then they're not respecting your boundaries. But those comparisons, that kind of stuff might start with, oh, well, my ex-boyfriend, he really made a lot of money, and we used to go to like all of the best places, and it was just so fantastic. He was so romantic. So the implied meaning there, right, is, hey, new boyfriend, you're going to really need to up your game. And then you're continually compared to this other person. And it's just that men and women do the same thing, or I should say abusive men and women tend to do the same thing. So it's not about gender. It's just about that behavior. And it comes out in many, 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 many different ways.
Yeah.
So
absolutely true.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have one for us?
Let's see here. Just a comment from Joan.
Okay.
It says, I find that as I get further into my healing, oh my God, I almost fell over. Sorry. I was trying to get my leg on the chair. That did not go as planned. Okay. Sorry. Joan, who says, I find that as I get further into healing, I give myself permission to walk away from people and things that make me feel bad. Thanks, Dana, for encouraging that practice. It seems so obvious now. And yes, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about probably one of the top parts of healing is we've got to be able to tell when we're being treated in a way that we don't like. So we don't even need to figure out, is this manipulation? Is this abuse? Is this person a narcissist? You just need to figure out, is something off here to me? Is this making me uncomfortable? And it may be even with somebody that you absolutely adore. That's a close friend. This is an emotionally safe person that you've known for 20 years and that you value them. And then they do something, they're really late and they don't bother to call. Or they do something that just that either hurts your feelings or that you're not okay with. when we're aware of, hey, I'm being treated in a way that I'm not okay with, then it's important that we either assert ourselves and say, hey, you know what? I was really ready to go an hour ago and I was so worried about you. And, I have to say, I'm just a little bit upset.
Yeah.
Assert ourselves. Or if they're manipulative and they're, that kind of stuff, we don't even need to assert ourselves. We just need to put up a boundary and get some distance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Angie, what were you going to say?
No, I'm with you 100%, actually. I just wanted to add this comment from Crystal. She says, I don't want to say I have less tolerance for people's BS, but I definitely have better boundaries. And I think that's what it comes down to. And I think people's BS, we do need to kind of have limits on that, but I had no boundaries. I thought I had boundaries, but I really didn't have any boundaries until I intentionally made some, created them. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big important thing.
Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff kind of swirls together. So when this picture kind of comes into focus, and because I was the exact same way, I thought I had good boundaries. I thought I had a lot of these things in place, and but then it's realizing, oh my gosh, I'm really out of tune with my wants and my needs and my opinions and my there's times I really struggle with being assertive and with boundaries and deal breakers and standards and knowing when I'm being mistreated, because the old me, it took quite a bit to get to that point where I was like, wow, now that's a problem. Because it just felt like I was being petty or too sensitive or not giving. It was that fear of missing out on a good person or feeling like I was being rude or judgmental. Like I needed that concrete proof that yes, indeed, this person was aggressive and violent and scary or cheating or what have you. And then the result of that is then we stay in problematic situations way, 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 way longer than we need to.
Yeah.
And if you back it way up and you're like, okay, I can now tell when I'm being mistreated because it kind of knocks you a little bit off balance. Like, whoa, I can't believe this just happened. Or I can't believe they just said something like that.
Yeah.
And then we address it early on, and that prevents, probably getting tangled up with an abuser, the vast, like 90%. Just that alone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I remember saying to my ex-husband, who taught you it was okay to act like that? I mean, and I don't know why I stayed as long as I did, because that should have been a red flag right there. Who taught you it was okay to treat people that way? That's what I would say. I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, I'm with you. So Bonnie says, it's hard in the religious community. We are expected to forgive and forget. Are you a bad person? Opinions. Okay. So this is what I would like to say about that really quick. Forgive, if you want to call it forgiveness, yes. But forgiveness to me in this case is releasing, right? So releasing that feeling of being slighted, of being screwed over or whatever. And forget is funny, but when they say turn the other cheek, religiously speaking, I don't think they necessarily mean let yourself be slapped again. And if they do mean that, well, we have a lot more to talk about. But I think it's about, yes, definitely don't keep that inside of yourself. Work through the feelings, work through the emotions, and release them. And don't hold a grudge if you can avoid it. But at the same time, don't be, I hate to say stupid, but don't think that anything's going to change. So just because you forgive a person doesn't mean you have to let that person stay in your life, right? You can forgive it. You don't have to tell them you forgave them. I didn't tell my narcissist I forgave them, but I let go of the anger that lived in me that was toxic to me. Does that make sense? I forgave them in that sense, that I released the feelings of anger. I released the feelings of holding a grudge, being hurt, whatever. And I grew forward into something healthier on so many levels. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a very similar view. When people talk to me about forgiveness, I very often will give my definition of the word, just like you did, Angie. So I always say, to me, forgiveness is not about allowance. It's not about continuation. It's about me working through the anger. It's forgiving, releasing that anger that I'm storing so it doesn't destroy my life.
Yeah.
And I still acknowledge, this person hurt me. They did X, Y, and Z. Like, these are facts. But in order for it not to destroy me, I have to release that. And the way that I work towards releasing that is, and people are going to do it in different ways at different times in healing, but, maybe you go outside and you scream. Maybe you take a boxing class. Maybe you, go for a run. Maybe you, start your own support group for this, and you start channeling your pain. You volunteer at a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen. You're channeling all of this energy into something positive because you're making that declaration of, I'm not going to let this ruin my life. I'm not going to let evil win.
Yeah.
And you just get really damn stubborn about it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I want to just throw in one more thing. And this really helped me when I recognized that by staying sad and staying angry and staying destroyed, I was still sort of indirectly letting that person control me. That was a light bulb moment. Because then I thought, well, no, just like you said, get stubborn about it, and make the choice to grow and evolve forward and change yourself in a healthy way instead of letting yourself just be continually, beaten down emotionally by yourself at this point. Because if their voice is still in your head, kick it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole, people talk about, oh, you need to forgive and forget. That part I'm very clear about. No, it's actually very important that we never forget. The Bible doesn't talk about keeping the bad people, abusive people in your life. There's quite a few passages, and I'll have to dig some up, that are very clear about you need to stay away from these people. There's one passage that talks about, basically, they're describing a narcissist, like avoid people that, are deceitful and hurtful, and that they do all of these things. And at the end of the passage, it says, do not spend time with them. Do not even eat lunch with them. So it lays it out, like you need to avoid these people. So, and I agree with that. And I think this understanding, again, this is because it's not bookmarked. It's not couched in this healthy context of, it's great to within a healthy context, you're able to, people are able to be assertive. They're able to bring up issues. Their behavior actually changes. And then that can actually deepen the relationship. But if it's one person's continuing to harm you, then that's not a relationship. And you just need to distance yourself from that person.
Totally agree. Yep.
Here's a comment from Josephine.
I was just about looking at that.
Are you?
Okay. Yeah, that's so funny. Go ahead.
She says, thank you both for being here. My question is, where do I look for help? Neither of you cover lesbian relationships. There is even more devaluing and discrimination.
I have some things to say about that. May I?
Go for it.
First of all, I have covered lesbian relationships. I know I have like 1,600 videos, so it might be hard to find, but I will try to message you if or something. If you go into Span and tag me, I'll share the links to you. I've interviewed lesbians and gay men, and I have covered that pretty extensively previously. However, with that being said, I think ultimately, and I've actually encouraged one of my former clients to jump onto this platform and try to do videos for lesbian women, but not everybody wants to get up there and do that. So, but I think that my bottom line is that ultimately, even though you may experience a different sort of devalue, discard, a different sort of insult, a different sort of thing, ultimately they all remain pretty parallel, and so that you can still get help here or over on my channel, or any from anyone who understands the concept. I'm not aware of an LGBT channel.
I'm not either.
But that is something that we could certainly look into.
And I will say too, what I have heard from many women is this is just kind of a side note. This is not your situation, but it is kind of loosely related, is that they will go through quite a few abusive relationships with men. And because they're not seeing the behavior as the problem, they're misidentifying it. And they're thinking, oh, it's men that are the problem. And so then they swear off men. And then they're like, okay, well, and they start seeking comfort in women because they think, oh, this is safer. And women's relationships tend to get really deep really fast. And so that whole level of rushing intimacy, just even with conversation, their guard is completely down because they just think that men are abusive. And I've heard from so many women that are like, man, I didn't think that women would be like this or could be like this. And I was so wrong. It's even worse. And nobody understands and nobody believes me. And, there's so many other challenges. Like if it's physical abuse and you're trying to go to a shelter, and then they potentially say that you're abusive, and then they show up at the same shelter.
Yeah.
Trying to get admitted.
I actually talked about that with one of my interviews, because she actually went to a shelter and was turned away because they said women don't hit women, which is, she was being hit. And I thought, are you freaking kidding me? But yeah, that's a really, one thing I forgot to mention is that one of my fellow coaches at queenbeing.com is actually a lesbian. I didn't even think of it because I just think of her as who she is. And I love her as a very close friend. But so that is another option for you if you are interested in some sort of direct help. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to, I just wanted to not forget.
I think it's a great resource and important, because there is that need, sure. I get it. It's hard. I think it's hard for any of us to even open up in general, but when there's these added layers of like sexuality or even religion or age or gender, all of these things can complicate it, because it's so hard to tell somebody like, yeah, this is what happened to me. And then for them to misunderstand or to be judgmental in some way. Yeah, just for that much more difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Marquella is talking in the chat about her ex is asking her for money. And everybody's giving her some really great advice here, including Angela Falsetta. But I think this is and she said I think she tried to get help, but the police said she needs proof. She's struggling with panic attacks and all of this stuff. But everyone's giving great advice, try to record him if you can. She says he leaves no voicemails. I'm guessing he must be texting, in which case I think you can definitely use those as evidence. I can't see the whole thing, but are you seeing this?
Yeah, I am. One of her posts in here is that he is dangerous. My 2 cents on dangerous people is to move, just to move. And I know that that can cost money, and it's an inconvenience, and it's not fair, and all of these things, but I would move by any means necessary. Seriously, if you have to go into credit card debt, if you have to take out a loan, if you have to borrow money from friends or family, anything to just get to another place, because people like that, they don't stop. And cameras, and then not only that, but you're continually looking over your shoulder. And there's a level of, if you already have PTSD from this, but even if you don't, that level of continual hypervigilance and all of that adrenaline that's going through you and continually looking over your shoulder, all of that is just, it's not worth it. I dealt with a guy when I was at a high school who was really scary, and he was dangerous. And this was before cell phones. And so I had my house phone number unlisted. I would change up the way that I would go to work. I was very clear that nobody, was to let him know where I was. Thankfully, he lived an hour away. I had moved quite a few times during that period because I'd quit several jobs because he would just surface. So I get it, but it's nothing is worth your safety or your sanity. Like, that really needs to be your number one priority by any means necessary.
Yeah. And she also mentions that she has kids. So I'll tell you this, Marquella, get your mama bear on, honey. Yeah. Like, seriously, because I don't know, me, I get a little crazy. I don't crazy like, but I mean, like, I'm strangely powerful when it comes to protecting my children. So if you have to, think about them first and think about how you can protect them, because that mama bear thing that we all get sometimes, That's powerful. And I think it's more powerful than sometimes our own self-protective measures.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she was saying, I'll have to get out of state. And if sometimes that's the best way to do it, is to get as much distance as you possibly can between you and them. And you might want to call your local domestic violence shelter. If you're in an area that has multiple ones, you might want to call multiple ones and say that your ex is incredibly violent. He's stalking you. You're afraid that he's going to potentially kill you, and that you really want to see about moving out. Like, this is your whole situation. Can they help you to move out of state? Some shelters have the funding to do that and some do not. But ask them. And if they say they don't, then say, do you know of any shelters that could potentially help you? If shelters can't, then you might want to start calling different churches and saying, this is my situation. I really need to leave. I'm terrified. Can you help? Sometimes churches have funding that they can give you, and $50, $500, like that adds up. So
it does. I'm 100% with you on that.
Yeah. And then just something real quick too. I would strongly encourage you. I don't know if this is your real name that's on here, but Google yourself. Okay. Your first name, your last name, see what comes up. And if and when you do move, make sure, and you might even want to consider changing your name or changing part of your name, maybe changing your last name.
Marcola is pretty identifiable. I don't know that many people name that, so you might.
I would agree. And seriously, I worked with a woman at a domestic violence shelter years ago who had to do this very thing, except her situation was terrifying and extreme, but she changed her name. She had to change everything. She still wouldn't even say this guy's name aloud out of fear. And it had been 15, 20 years. So so I would consider doing that. I would really do an image search for all of the photos that this goes for everybody too. Like, know what's out there about you on the internet, because trying to just moving isn't going to do the trick if there's all this other information out there and you're doing posts on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook that has the location on, and that they can see, oh, you're at this restaurant in this city and state.
Yeah.
So lots of things, we can talk more about this if need be on another day.
Yeah. But definitely take it seriously and take yourself and your safety seriously, because you're worth it and your children are worth it. So, yep. I like this comment from Mindy, and she's absolutely on point, Mindy Benham. She says, we wait for something big to happen so that we can leave. And she says, but we slowly get accustomed to worse and worse things. And I think that's spot on. Yeah.
And that's what makes it so dangerous and so frustrating for friends and family, because this has become a person's new normal, where it's like, well, yeah, he threatened to kill me and then he, did this. But but in our mind, it's like, well, but he's only laid his hands on me a few times, or he or she's only put, they were choking me, but I didn't like black out, or I've never had a broken bone, or I've never had bruises, or we're always moving the bar. This is why it's so important to understand our deal breakers and to have that line in the sand, because in any situation, it's really easy for us to continue justifying problematic behavior to where it's the new level of normal. And because we can be a really poor judge of what's dangerous when we're in these situations, it can help to think, if you had a daughter or a loved one that was experiencing this, what would you encourage her or him to do? And then go do that, because that's what you need to go do. That's the healthy side of you telling you this is what you need to go do.
I totally agree with you. I tell everybody that, think about your kid or whoever you love unconditionally in your life, your nephew, niece, best friend, grandma, whatever. Think about what you would say to them. That's powerful. And it changed my life for sure. That little bit of a shift in perspective. Yeah. Good stuff. Okay. Let's see. Do you have a,
I'm looking here. Angela was mentioning about, and be aware of those with pets. If you are in the USA, you can take animals. If you're staying behind, for them. You don't have to, shelters accept them, take them with you, no reason to delay. And I just wanted to add that is really dependent upon the animal that you have and the shelter that you're going to. The one I worked at did not take animals of any kind. So it really does depend. I mean, every shelter is different. Some shelters are really super secure, safe houses. Some are, there's no fence whatsoever, and they're just a house in a neighborhood, and you'd never be able to guess the difference. You know, some have staff, some are run by women that used to be there. Some are, you know, big, some are small. Some take pets, some don't. But so I would always encourage you, call the shelter ahead of time, because a lot of times they get full. So if you have the opportunity to call ahead of time, let them know this is your situation. This is how many children you have coming with you. This is, if you have pets, this is what you have. If you're saying, I really don't want to leave my pets behind, is there any way that you can help me place them? Where I used to work, we had a church that they had funds that they would pay to have women's pets boarded. They had a person that would help board all cats and dogs and such. So there's ways. It's just, you know, finding out the resources in your area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is a good question from Broken Winged Angel. She said, excuse me. She said, I don't know. She said, I don't think I know or can recognize healthy. I think I was groomed to be supply or codependent. Are those different or the same? I mean, they're slightly different, but they're very basic. If you are a supply, you often are also a codependent. So a supply is a person who provides ego boost to the narcissist, and sometimes that's in the form of emotions, set happy or otherwise. Sometimes that's in the form of admiration, praise, whatever. They get something out of it, the narcissist. Whereas a codependent is someone who, I guess, is kind of conditioned to do that, or kind of needs other people in order to validate themselves, kind of. And it's a lot bigger of a definition than that. But, you know, you have to learn what healthy looks like. It's a process, but it involves you yourself working toward feeling stronger, feeling more sure of yourself, as far as, you know, trusting yourself. And as you go forward, you know, do your research, talk to people who don't make you feel yucky. Dana has actually a really great, you talk, Dana, about how people make you feel when you're around them, and how you have that one person, your brother, who you know is safe. Could you explain that maybe to the
Sure. Yeah, I think a great place to start, and this is a concept that I got from the book Psychopath Free, which is fantastic. And in it, he talks about the concept of a constant. This person in his book, he talks about his constant is his cat. But for me, I needed an actual person to help keep me grounded. So my constant is my brother. He's an emotionally safe guy. I've known him my whole life. So whenever I find myself confused or wondering, is it me? Is it them? Is this weird? Is it not? Am I too sensitive? Or, you know, all of that waffling, that back and forth, I go back to, how do I feel when I'm around my brother? Because I always feel like cool, calm, collected, relaxed, safe, secure when I'm around those kinds of people. It's when I'm around people that have manipulative, confusing, crazy making, erratic, super dysfunctional behavior that I start feeling like somebody took a magnet to my internal compass, and I can't tell are they the problem? Is it me? I don't know. Is this bad? Is it good? Did I say something? You're just all over the place. And with those kinds of people, if you can tell if it's you or them, because if you bring it up and say, you know, I'm really confused by this, or I thought we were doing this, or you're trying to bring clarifying communication to the table, if you do that and it only makes things worse, or it doesn't resolve the existing issue, then it's them.
Yeah.
So conversation, sincere communication should improve the situation. So if it's not, then there's something off there. But yeah, paying attention to how you feel. And this, it helps to just back it way up and to start with paying attention to how you feel with little things that you don't have an emotional investment in.
Yeah, good point.
Like we were talking about earlier, having an opinion. It's much easier to start practicing asserting yourselves over lunch, what you want for lunch, pizza or Chinese. It's a lot easier to start asserting yourself in that kind of a context than it is around your abusive mother, right? Who you've known for 40 years. So starting small, kind of building up your confidence, building up the practice, paying attention to how you're feeling, this kind of stuff. When stuff is not for you, when it's toxic, it feels toxic. It's energetically draining. It's emotionally draining. It feels confusing. You feel irritated. You feel angry. You feel uncertain. You feel ongoing introspection. Is it me? Is it them? Is this weird? Is it not? All of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's sort of like when you're healthy, you don't feel healthy, right? Like you just feel normal. You don't notice anything, but you stub your toe, you notice your toe.
Don't you know?
Right? And you notice it for about 2 days. If you're like me and you really bang it hard, it's the same thing with the problematic person. If you're not around one, like you're fine. Like things are calm. There's peace in your life. But when you're around one, it's that constant irritation and focus of your attention.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to say this one more thing really quick to Mark Wallace. She said, and then I'm 2 minutes over. But Mark Wallace says, he keeps saying he wants to see the birth. And I want to say this to you. I assume you're in the United States. And if you are, you have every right to say no. He doesn't get to see the birth. You don't have to let anybody in there who you don't want. You could just tell the nurse, I only want my friend Jackie in here, or whatever her name is, or my mom or whatever. Nobody else is allowed in here. And I know this because my ex-husband's grandmother tried to come in and look and watch all the things. And I whispered to the nurse I didn't want her in the room anymore, and she did not return to the room. But I know that you don't have to let him in the room. You don't even have to tell him if you're going to have a natural birth. You don't even have to tell him when you go to the hospital, legally speaking. I mean, you probably have to inform him after the fact, but outside of that, and if you're not married, I'm not telling you what to do, and I'm not suggesting this, but if you're not married, he has to sign the birth certificate to be on the birth certificate. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. I would contact the hospital social worker ahead of time and tell her my ex is abusive. If you're not married, what are my rights and responsibilities and obligations if he's on the birth certificate versus if he's not?
Good point.
And with the hospital staff, you might even want to kind of couch what you're saying, because Angie's right. Like nobody can go in there without your consent. Yeah. Couch it as there might be some people that are going to try to come in here and they're going to tell you all kinds of things that it's important and that you want them in there and whatnot. But I only want these 3 people, right? Yeah. Like X, Y, and Z in the room with me, period, end of story. I don't care if somebody's begging. I don't care if they say that they're the father. I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got to be safe. And if this is your first child, very shortly, you will know exactly what I mean by mother love. I just got mama bear stuff. I just got goosebumps just saying that because it's so powerful. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, Angie's got to run, so I should too. So, okay, Angie, thank you so much for joining us today. And next week we'll be over at Angie's channel, Angie Atkinson, across the interwebs. Yep. And on YouTube. So make sure you're there 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, Dana.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. There we go.